when the water crisis is over, and somebody stands up and says, hey, the water crisis is over, will anybody believe them?
No.
No.
No, not at all. Who's saying it though?
And based on what?
Exactly.
That's the
That's
nature
the
of
ticket
this
right
story.
there.
And
That's
we're going to
the
be
ticket.
talking with the writer of that story, Chariton. A pretty lengthy piece. I think it printed out at almost 14 pages. Why is there so much to talk about if the water crisis is over?
Yeah, you know, I've been here many times, and last year there was some declarations made that the water was, you know, now considered normal after several rounds of water testing since the crisis happened. So I started looking into, you know, the science that was used. I read the reports. I read EPA regulations.
Just in a nutshell, at one point early on, after the acknowledgement that there was a water crisis in Flint, and just recently, Mark Edwards verified state reports that in fact has happened, that the water is beginning to recoat the pipes, and that it's testing within federal standards. That's essentially as close to an all clear as I think we're ever going to hear.
Well, interestingly enough, which is in the story, about 6 months after he made that claim that phosphates would recoat the pipes, he actually said, in retrospect, it was naive to think adding phosphates to the pipes would, you know, recoat them and obviously reduce the lead levels. Essentially, very kind of guesswork. Edwards in particular, to claim that the water was safe and normal, he only looked at 34 homes in a city of around 40,000. Overall, he tested 138 homes, but he took of that sample 34 to say he met the EPA's lead and copper rule. To really just dumb it down, the lead and copper rule mandates that you have to test the most at-risk homes for lead, which would be homes that are connected to lead service lines. He says he only tested 17 homes in this city connected to lead service lines. The problem with that claim, besides the very small sample size, is the EPA lead and copper rule. Essentially, there's no verification that the homes that he tested or the state tested were actually connected to lead service lines. They didn't use plumbers to verify that they were connected to lead service lines. They used very, very flawed records. Literally, there were records.
I was going to say, you know, in defense of not just Edwards, but others who have tried to test water and figure out, you know, where we are with this. How do you know which pipes are lead pipes?
He told me
they're
that
underground and the records are
written off index cards. That's what I found in my story. University of Michigan Flint did a study around Flint, kind of a mapping study to see where the lead service lines were. Their study was based off...
They stepped up and offered to do it before
Right.
they even knew what they were getting into.
Exactly.
and they started going through the records and went, this is nuts.
Yeah, index cards. The majority of...
Written in pencil, which had smeared and was almost unreadable
Right.
on most cards.
11 to 15,000 homes were missing, either because they were unreadable or there were no records for them. And that...
And probably nobody told them they built them.
Right. And that study was what Edwards, as well as the state of Michigan, based the homes they were testing. Very, very, a patchwork of guesswork. I mean, Edwards told me on the record, well, I researched the ages of the homes online. And that's part of how I was able to say these are connected to lead service lines. The EPA, there's no regulations that allow you to research ages of homes online to surmise, yes, I tested homes connected to lead service lines. And for the layman, for something like Flint, the man-made disaster that happened here, do you really think it's credible or enough to really just claim that the water is normal? He says compared to other cities with old lead pipes, when you're looking at 34 homes, there's no way to even verify those homes are connected to lead service lines. And also, putting aside Edwards, the state if you look at the online map, you could type in an address, zip codes, and all the homes will come up that they tested. There are a staggering amount of homes that were last tested in 2016 and 2017 that show hundreds of parts per billion over the EPA's limit. EPA's limit is 15 parts per billion. One gentleman, Bernard Mader, in the story, 11,886 parts per billion, never went back to retest it. There's examples like that all over the city. So, you know, my piece says, well, how do you declare the water safe if, number one, there's a lot of cases of homes with elevated levels that were never retested? Number two, there's still an ongoing amount of homes that are popping up with elevated lead samples. I counted 100, almost 150 in the last 6 months. And that's just the homes that are being tested. There's less homes being tested now. So I think it's not just in Flint, by the way. This kind of guesswork is happening.
It's popping up all over the state. Some people would say that it's almost impossible to have zero lead, so you have to pick a level. And it was maybe somewhat arbitrarily decided back then, but it was probably applauded by most people as a place to start. Mm-hmm. And now here we are 40 years later, and you know, we didn't do much with it.
Right.
In all of the reporting you've done on the Flint water crisis, do you see a particular place that blame lies, as so many that want to point to Rick Snyder?
I think that it's not any one official. I think there's a lot of blame to go around, but to me, you know, they very, very hastily made this decision to switch from Detroit to the Flint River, even though the Flint water treatment plant told the state of Michigan, we don't have the capabilities to really safely have us switch to the Flint River. They told Michigan Department of Environmental Quality that, you know, I think a few weeks before the switch was made. I also think at the end of the day, there's a lot of questionable claims that were made as far as, well, we're doing this to save money. I mean, in my reporting, the Detroit Water and Sewage, they offered to cut down their rates to the point where it would have been cut down by 50% before they made this switch. I think what you really saw here is an effort by the state to switch temporarily to the Flint River because they wanted to build this Carragandi water pipeline, which, from everything I've seen, they could call it what they want. Seems to me to be more of a privatized system that they were going for. So I think blame goes all around, but at the end of the day, it's not just Snyder. It's not just Snyder. Claim that he didn't know what was going on, and he didn't know that there was all these complaints and all this fear in Flint for as long as he says he didn't know. I find that hard to believe. And also, let's call it what it is. This didn't happen under President Trump. This happened under President Obama's administration. And it didn't exactly improve under President Obama's administration either. So I think there's a lot of blame to go around.
There's a lot of things that make the decision-making that went on during that time much more complicated than typically would be the case. One is a long history of bad relations with the Detroit water supply and the feeling by residents in Flint. Now this goes back. Now all anybody can think about is we switched to Flint River bad. Been a lot of cleanup on the Flint River. It's in the best shape it's been in maybe 100 years. But, and I would add that 65% of the country is getting its water out of local rivers. You know, it can be done, and it can be done well, even with the Flint River. But there were people who were saying, we have a river, it runs right through the town. Why are we paying these exorbitant rates? Well, it turns out it wasn't Detroit that was charging the exorbitant rates. It was the city of Flint, which was using the water fund as a backup to the general fund.
Right.
And that makes it complicated. Residents of Flint request you tell us where we can file a formal complaint against the behavior since 2016 of Professor Mark Edwards of Virginia Tech. We also request that you send representatives to Flint as soon as possible for a meeting with us to hear directly from us about our experiences with Mr. Edwards and our call for an investigation into Mr. Edwards' conduct and the harm his actions have caused. Had you seen that?
Yeah, I did see that.
And read through that. And then there are some concerns that are outlined below. But do you think this is an appropriate action, or is this more of that finger pointing?
Well, I think that from the residents I spoke to, and the reason I even began to look into his testing, is every time I was in Flint, I kept getting the same name, Mark Edwards, and not in a positive manner. I don't know Mark Edwards, I've never met him, so my piece doesn't really go into him personally. But I kept hearing that anyone who questioned his science or his foundings, there was a level of intimidation or attack. I've seen personally some of the messages he has sent Flint residents via text, via email, that frankly, in my view, were not what a scientist should be doing. It was kind of harassing, intimidating, and I think that also there has been a bit of a, whether he put it out there or the media has kind of put out a hero narrative about him rather than focusing on the residents.
And what happened there was when he joined with Genesee County
Health Department.
the health department official, I can't remember what his title is.
Mark.
But Edwards and the head of the Genesee County Health Department and Dr. Mona Atisha held a press conference and were completely slammed and ridiculed by public officials in the wake of that. But because they persevered, and that's where some of this hero worship starts talking, somewhere along the line they decided that having the powers that be like them was better than having them not like them.
Well, all I have to say, because Mark Edwards, by the way, I mean, full disclosure, has attacked me many times. He's been giving a presentation around the country when he goes to speak, where I'm in his PowerPoint. He actually...
I've attacked you a couple times.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I could take it.
I thought you ambushed that bean counter at City Hall, asking him why he poisoned the city of Flint. And all this guy does is sit in a room and look at numbers.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, I don't mind criticism of my... I don't mind criticism of my reporting. The attacks were weird because they kind of chopped up a bunch of videos, separate videos, to make me kind of look stupid. Anyway, my point is, I think, I can't speak for residents, but I can say I've heard from enough of them that they've had issues with him, not only his treatment of residents, but the way he goes about even people questioning him. Most scientists want to collaborate with other people if other people see other things or want to test different things, and he has not shown that. So I remember in July of 2016, so almost 2 years ago, I got a message from someone in Flint basically telling me that, the government's lying and it's not, crisis isn't over, and, all the national cameras had left at that time. So I decided to go to Flint to see it for myself because I had never covered it. I was covering the campaign at that time. And I got here, and pretty much within 20 minutes, it was very clear that, crisis not over. You kept seeing stacks of water bottles on people's porches and things like that. And I just started interviewing residents, and I remember one particular resident I interviewed, Christina Murphy. I was sitting on her porch. Her and her husband at the time had some of the worst lead levels in the city. Her husband, cognitively was a shell of himself. And they had 5
I've
kids.
had the Murphys on the show, I know.
And their kids had health issues related to it. And I just remember sitting on that porch and thinking to myself, CNN right now is covering, what Trump tweeted. Meanwhile, this city has been poisoned and it's basically being left to fend for themselves among the media. So I'm kind of just a sucker for corruption and injustice, and I think Flint is kind of the definition of corruption and injustice. Way before the water crisis, by the way. I've been reading up on Detroit and Flint and just Michigan politics in general. So
it's a trip, isn't
it?
So,
I'm very attracted. To me, if media stops covering this, if the cameras go away, the microphones go away, what happened here then gets normalized, and I don't think it should be normalized when American citizens.
And that's an excellent point, and one of the things that I've been really frustrated by as somebody who, was born and raised in Flint, and I'm old enough to know at least a couple of generations worth of political history from this area, that what used to keep it in check, I mean, the politics have always been weird. Racially, along party lines, labor management issues, all of these things. Michigan and Flint have been really strange to manage politically, but because of a well-informed, well-funded, free press, it kept it in check. Mm-hmm. It kept it from becoming the norm. Mm-hmm. Even though it was every day, it wasn't accepted as the norm because there was a voice calling it out. And that's been a real problem, and especially when you have a big problem like we've had in Flint that has multiple layers, and it's not just one problem. There are other problems going on. Mm-hmm. We haven't even talked about Legionnaire's disease and the spikes in that, which has also been blamed on the Flint River, which may have absolutely nothing to do with the Flint River, even though bacteria is one of the issues that's difficult to manage when you use river water. But in all your reporting and in this extended piece, have you seen anybody that is working and on the right path toward how to not only fix this isn't just about changing pipes, but how to set up standards and protocols and procedures that will work toward getting people safe water?
I think that you said something in the previous segment that's key. I don't even think the public officials know the science and the engineering well enough to be making the right decisions. And that's part of what this piece is about, to show them, hey.
But that's what we're supposed to have organizations like the EPA for. Everybody's throwing a fit right now because Scott Pruitt is undoing regulations, at breakneck speed. Mm-hmm. And, woe is me. But then you look at the Flint water crisis and you go back a little ways and you see people prior to Scott Pruitt that weren't using the force they did have.
Right. Well, I also think a part of this has to do with Pruitt, but even before Pruitt, part of the problem is you cannot have one-size-fits-all regulations on the federal or state level that every single city follows one set of regulations. What happened in Flint is very different than lead problems in Milwaukee, for example. Milwaukee didn't have toxic river water added to their pipes for a year that pretty much damaged all the pipes. So,
but see, that's where media from around the country, you and CNN and others, have done a lot of people in this city a disservice by saying things like toxic river water, because the river water in Flint isn't any more toxic than any other stream flowing through America right now. But if you don't treat it, that's what leaches lead out of the pipes. It was the treatment protocols that weren't working. And I think it's a little bit embarrassing for Flint that we have 3 universities, actually more than that, housed right here in Flint proper. We have several universities, and we have to have somebody from Virginia Tech tell us that our water's bad. That's embarrassing.
And I also think, you asked me, is anyone pushing this towards the right goal? I actually see the residents doing the job of the politicians. I've seen residents...
Well, they always have.
Right.
In the end, that's always where it comes from.
Residents, activists, I mean, you look at people like Melissa Mays and other activists and, activist organizations literally are the only ones pointing out the deficiencies in the testing and how the testing, whether it's Edwards or the state, isn't really meeting EPA regulations. They're saying they are, but if you actually read the reports, they aren't. And I see city officials, again, I don't live here, so I don't want to be a, kind of a parachute journalist, but from what I've seen, because I've gone to a bunch of city council meetings, I've interviewed city officials.
It's okay, Rachel Maddow did it.
Right. And you mentioned CNN and MSNBC, and to me, I think it's kind of disgraceful. I understand Trump gives profits and ratings, but none of them have been covering this for going on 2 years now. But to me, the city officials need to actually start understanding the science, because to me, Rick Snyder shut down these water pods based on really questionable science, and if the public officials don't understand the science, then there's no one to fight back.
We have to have science we can rely on. The science has to be impeccable, because so many people don't understand the science. We're relying on them for how we make our decisions. So with that, as we get closer to the top of the hour, a couple things that we need to take care of to wrap up. First, where can people see the article we've been talking about?
Yeah, sure. So truthdig.com, and then dig.com. It's also top of my Twitter at Jordan Chariton, and I'll be doing videos here all week. YouTube.com/Jordan Chariton Reports. And I think to end it, Mark Edwards himself, I write in the piece, has talked about the problems with scientists skewing results to meet their funding agency.
And it's easy to find it on truthdig.com, because it has a couple of my favorite alliterative phrases: fraudulence in Flint and suspect science, right in the headlines. So,
I will work on that.
Well, nice turn of phrase, Jordan.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And when do you think you'll launch this network?
If any kind people with some quarters in their pocket help me out, I'm hoping by the end of the summer. We're trying to launch a network named Status Coup.
Yep. And every and for every dollar going to Status Coup, the Tom Sumner program will accept $1.
Yes.